It was a bright morning in Singapore. The sun poured through the glass walls of the Golden Phoenix Hotel, a place of elegance, luxury, and quiet perfection. Guests from all over the world arrived in sleek cars, greeted by bellboys in golden uniforms and the soft music of a piano echoing through the lobby. Among the hotel's staff was a young man named Ethan Cole. He was tall, calm and polite, the kind of man who carried both humility and quiet, strength in his presence. But to most people there, he was invisible. Ethan had come all the way from Ghana with dreams bigger than anyone around him could imagine. He worked tirelessly, arranging silver trays, polishing glasses, folding napkins with military precision. He never complained, never showed fatigue, and always wore a gentle smile. But behind that smile was a story few knew. Ethan spoke 3 languages, English, French, and Mandarin, fluently. He had studied for years back home, believing that language could open doors to understanding. Yet in this grand hotel, his knowledge stayed hidden, unused, unseen. To his superiors, he was just another worker. One particular morning, as he adjusted the flowers on the table, the hotel's general manager, Richard, entered the hall. Richard was a man who carried himself with an air of superiority. His suit was always perfect, his tone sharp, and his eyes quick to judge. He stopped in front of Ethan and said, "Big day today. Madam Lee is arriving this afternoon. I want no mistakes." Ethan nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir." Richard glanced at him again and added, "And, Ethan, maybe it's better if you stay in the back during the event. You know, just to avoid confusion." Ethan froze for a moment. He understood what Richard really meant. It wasn't confusion Richard feared, it was appearance. The billionaire guest was from China, and Richard assumed a black waiter might not fit the image of the perfect luxury welcome. Ethan's heart sank, but he didn't argue. He just replied softly, "As you wish, sir." And with that, he went back to arranging the tables, pretending not to hear the unspoken prejudice in Richard's words. By afternoon, the grand ballroom was ready, crystal glasses shining, chandeliers glowing, and every waiter standing in line like soldiers. The doors opened, and Madame Lee entered with her entourage, her assistant, her translator, and a few investors. She was elegant, confident, and carried the calm authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. She spoke quickly in Mandarin, giving instructions to her team. Most of the hotel staff nodded politely, pretending to understand, but their blank expressions said otherwise. Madame Lee sighed. She turned to Richard, who greeted her in awkward Mandarin that sounded more like a broken mix of words memorized from a translation app. She forced a polite smile, but her eyes showed disappointment. Then she muttered quietly in Mandarin, "They smile, but they don't respect us." Her tone wasn't angry, it was weary, a kind of sadness that comes when you've been misunderstood one too many times. Ethan, standing by the far wall, heard her words clearly. He understood every syllable. His heart ached because he recognized that pain, the feeling of not being truly seen, not being respected. As the meeting continued, waiters served tea and small plates of delicate desserts. The atmosphere was formal, tense, almost too perfect, until one small accident changed everything. One of the young waiters, nervous under pressure, accidentally spilled hot tea near Madame Lee's cup. The porcelain clattered against the tray, and a few drops splashed onto the tablecloth. The entire room went silent. Richard rushed forward, apologizing profusely. "I'm terribly sorry, Madame Lee. It won't happen again." Madame Lee didn't say anything. She just looked at the stain on the cloth, then at the trembling waiter, and finally at Richard, disappointment written across her face. She muttered something again in Mandarin, sharp and cutting this time. "This is how they treat guests they don't understand." No one responded. No one even knew what she had said. Ethan's hands tightened around the tray he was holding. His mind screamed to step forward, to explain, to apologize in her language. But Richard's earlier words echoed in his head. "Stay out of sight." So he stayed still. But Madame Lee suddenly turned her gaze toward Ethan. Perhaps she noticed his hesitation, or maybe it was pure instinct. She looked him straight in the eyes and said in Mandarin, "Do any of you understand me at all?" The room froze again. Every waiter looked at each other, unsure what to do. Richard tried to laugh nervously. "Oh, Madame Lee, we have translators if needed." But before he could finish, Ethan took a slow breath and stepped forward. He bowed slightly, his voice calm, deep and fluent, in perfect Mandarin. "Please forgive us, Madame Lee," he said. "It was an accident. Allow me to prepare a new tea set for you, just as you prefer it." The server was nervous because we wanted your visit to be perfect. The next morning, the sun rose gently over Singapore, painting golden light across the tall glass windows of the Golden Phoenix Hotel. The staff walked in quietly, whispering about what had happened the night before. Everyone had seen it, the impossible moment when Ethan, the man they barely noticed, had spoken fluent Mandarin and turned disaster into respect. In the dining hall, Richard sat alone, staring at the morning newspaper. He had barely slept. His mind replayed every second. Madam Lee's disappointment, the spilled tea, and then Ethan stepping forward like a quiet storm that changed everything. For the first time in his life, Richard didn't feel like the one in control. He felt small, ashamed. When Ethan walked in, carrying his uniform freshly ironed, some of the younger waiters smiled at him. A few even nodded politely. That was new. Yesterday they barely noticed him. Today they looked at him with something closer to admiration. Ethan only nodded back humbly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. By noon the hotel lobby was filled again. Madam Lee was hosting a press luncheon before leaving the city, and cameras from different media outlets had arrived. The air buzzed with excitement. Ethan quietly prepared the tables, unaware that he was about to step into the spotlight once again. When Madam Lee entered, she immediately looked around the room and smiled as her eyes found Ethan. "Ah," she said softly in Mandarin. "My friend is here." Everyone turned. Richard quickly stepped forward, trying to regain his authority. "Madam Lee, we're honored to have you again," he said, forcing a smile. Madam Lee smiled politely and replied in English this time. "Yes, I was very impressed by your hotel yesterday, especially by one of your staff members." She turned to Ethan. "Would you join me at the table, please?" The entire hall froze. Waiters exchanged glances. Richard blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Ethan looked confused, almost hesitant. "Me, madam?" "Yes, you," she said kindly. "You understand not just my words, but my heart. Sit beside me." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then bowed slightly and took the seat beside her. Cameras immediately turned in their direction. Reporters began whispering. The billionaire, guest sitting with a hotel waiter, was not something they saw every day. The lunch began. Madam Lee spoke to the journalists about global hospitality, business ethics, and respect in service. Every time someone asked her a question in Mandarin, Ethan translated her response perfectly into English. When the questions came in English, he translated them back to Mandarin with grace and confidence. It was flawless, smooth, professional. Halfway through the event, a reporter asked Madam Lee a question that changed everything. "What impressed you the most about your stay here?" Madam Lee smiled and placed her hand gently on Ethan's shoulder. "This man," she said. "He represents what true hospitality means. He reminded me that respect has no language barrier and no color. It is the heart that speaks first." Her words were powerful. The room went completely silent, and then applause. Not polite, formal applause, but real heartfelt clapping that filled the entire hall. Ethan lowered his head humbly, trying to hide the emotion in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible. After the press left, Madam Lee stood and said softly to Richard, "You have a good man here. You should see him as more than a uniform." Richard swallowed hard, nodded, and thanked her. As she left the hall, she turned to Ethan once more. "Keep speaking the language of respect," she said with a gentle smile. Then she walked away, leaving behind silence and awe. For a few moments, no one spoke. Then Richard slowly walked toward Ethan. His tone was quiet, different from before. "Ethan, about yesterday and today." He paused, searching for the right words. "I was wrong. I judged you without knowing you. You didn't just save the hotel. You taught me something I should have already known." Ethan looked at him calmly. "We all learn in different ways, sir," he said softly. "Sometimes the hard way." Richard nodded. "From today onward, you're not just a waiter. I want you to take over the position of head of international guest relations. You deserve it." Ethan froze. He thought he had misheard. "Sir?" Richard smiled a little awkwardly. "It's official. You'll be handling international guests. Your Mandarin is a gift, and we need people like you." Ethan blinked slowly, unable to speak for a moment. "Thank you, sir." That night, when the hotel lights dimmed and the city fell quiet, Ethan walked home under the soft rain. The streets shimmered under the golden reflections of street lamps. He stopped at a small cafe, ordered tea, and called his mother back home on video. Her face appeared on the small screen, framed in warmth and love. My son, she said, you look different today. You're glowing. Ethan laughed softly. Mama, I did something today. Something good. She smiled. Tell me, what did you do? I spoke, he said simply. I spoke when no one expected me to. And they finally listened. Tears welled in her eyes. I always told you, Ethan, when you speak from respect, even silence listens. Ethan smiled. You were right, Mama. He looked around at the quiet city. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of new beginnings. He whispered softly to himself. Respect isn't given by wealth or position or color. It's something you earn by staying true, even when they try to make you invisible. The camera slowly pulls back, Ethan standing under the soft glow of a streetlight, holding his phone, smiling through tears. Behind him, the skyline of Singapore shines like 1,000 dreams waiting to be lived.